This is Tower Defense Simulator, a simple game where you place towers to attack enemies along a track. The goal? Don't let the enemies reach the end. For a game with such a simple premise, it has an incredibly interesting history of updates ranging from long delays to updates so good they deserve Bloxy awards. Let's start with 2019. Tower Defense Simulator gets released and immediately sees success thanks to content creators like Roblox making videos on the game. The game, despite being a complete copy of Tower Battles and being worse at that, has a special charm to it, being beginner friendly and having several game modes that made it even have a chance to begin with. 2019 was fun. With the game getting frequent updates and new towers and content being added regularly, the future was looking bright for the game, and it did not disappoint. Going into 2020, there was one update that kicked it all off, the Mega Update. The game was revamped quite a lot and looked something like this. Following the update would come fun events such as Halloween, Winter, and Egg Hunt events. This time period of Tower Defense Simulator is what we call today Old TDS. Old TDS is what felt like a golden era of frequent updates and fun events, every update being exciting and the developers actually putting in passion into the game. Tower Defense Simulator, the simple and yet fun game, was reaching player counts of over 20k. And what is the game like today? Well, here it is. The visuals look far more stunning and there are lots of extremely convenient features such as keybinds and private lobbies. The game by all means has improved. But despite the clear improvements, there is a community consisting not of tens, not of hundreds, not even of thousands, but tens or perhaps hundreds of thousands of people who prefer the simple yet charming old version of Tower Defense Simulator. Development teams have spent months and even years recreating the old version of the game, not for money, not for fame, but purely out of their love for the long-gone version of the game. Is this just our nostalgia? Or is there really something old TDS had that was so special you can't find it in the game today? So special it justifies months and years of working on recreating the game. So special that it justifies complaints and even blatant hatred for the game in the modern day. I think there is. So travel back in time with me to see how the game really was. Here I am, in the old lobby just as it was back in 2020. This game is called TDS Legacy, and unfortunately there is a chance the developers of Tower Defense Simulator today will attempt to take it down. The game is linked in the description of this video. In the meantime, we are given a chance to look for ourselves and see what it is about old TDS that made it so special to so many of us. Beginning with the lobby, we are given plenty of elevators which we must enter to start a match. Our towers are Scout and Sniper, which are not great but will work in defending the early waves. The first game I went into was on the Harbor map, which is a really easy map. I loaded in with several players and the mode that was chosen was Golden mode. This is the second hardest mode in the game and is all golden themed. Speaking of which, the modern day game does technically have 4 modes: Normal, Molten, Fallen, and Hardcore, but Hardcore is exclusive to earning gems, so on most maps you're left with 3 options. The thing is, Molten is incredibly easy. You can solo it with just soldiers. On the other hand, Fallen mode is far harder, often requiring a full loadout with good towers. This leaves a massive difficulty gap which was once filled by Golden mode. But anyways, we begin with abnormal enemies. These come out on Golden and Fallen modes, while Molten and Beginner modes have just normal enemies. The abnormals aren't much harder, but they do put some variance between the 4 modes. Me and my team defend with just Scout, Enforcer, and Swarmer. Enforcer is the old version of the modern day Shotgunner tower, and it was loved far more thanks to its ability to spawn SWAT vans. This however will come later, and in the meantime, our first challenge showed up on wave 7. These were heavies. Slow but far stronger than the previous abnormals and speedies we saw. We then get a freezer, which in the modern version of TDS is an absolute joke which does no damage, does not slow down big enemies at all, and hits only one enemy at a time. In this version of Tower Defense Simulator, the freezer actually freezes enemies for a while, freezes multiple of them, and even has an ability at max level to slow down all the enemies inside of its range, including the problematic bigger enemies. On wave 11 I start getting snipers, which in this game actually happens to be really good when you get a lot of them. Harder enemies come out, such as bosses, as the waves go on, but our team was defending with minigunners and snipers, which altogether did great. Enemies such as the tank were able to stun our towers, making them exceptionally dangerous. One thing I haven't mentioned yet are mystery enemies. These were replaced by breakers in the modern version of TDS since having RNG in the gameplay is not fun. There will be a perfect example of this later in the video, by the way. The next mechanic exclusive to old TDS is the shield. The orange shield with a number on it represents the maximum amount of damage that a tower can deal to it. If the shield says 5, any tower dealing less than 5 damage, such as Minigunner, is not effective. On the other hand, slower firing towers such as Outlaw that can deal over 200 damage will lose most of their damage as it gets decreased to 5. This makes fast firing towers, also rammers such as the SWATman and military base, as well as splash towers, extremely useful for countering these shields since they all bypass the shield. This adds a core focus of defense onto the gameplay. Another example of this being hidden enemies. Only certain towers can see hiddens, meaning you can't willy-nilly go in with any loadout and defeat all enemies, but rather have to strategize and choose your loadout more carefully. The old shield is exactly that, countering P-brained outlaw spam for example. This ultimately adds use to towers which otherwise wouldn't be all that useful, such as Rocketeer and Mortar. We get to the last wave and there are several Golden Guardians and one Golden Titan, a final boss. He stuns quite a lot, but we had enough defense. The reward for this mode is 720 coins, which is actually more than the modern day Fallen mode. Okay, I messed up, it's only 580 and it's more on Molten, but ignore that. When you combine that with the fact that towers also used to be cheaper, it's pretty clear that there was less grinding. This meant that the early game progression was faster and honestly more fun since it felt like you get new towers almost every game. I was able to get Soldier and Paintballer and then went to play another match on Molten mode. The premise was really similar, starting with weaker enemies. One of our teammates brought the John Tower. It had a 0-2 skin in this game, but usually it's just a chef. It was of course created for John Roblox, the man who really helped the game get popular at the start. In the modern day, John was turned into Militant, but this tower was, a lot more fun to use back then. The game went similarly. This time I was spamming soldiers to defend. We also had commanders which boosted all the towers around. Finishing Molten gave 460 coins, which is less than the modern Molten mode, which gives 500. Having done 2 of the modes, I wanted to check out beginner mode, so I hopped into a solo game to see if I could win. The modern version of beginner mode is normal mode, which is an actual dumpster fire for reasons I will explain in a second. I did quite well, but eventually died to the mysteries I was talking about earlier, as one of them spawned a boss far back on the map. I got to wave 32 and gained 224 coins, which is actually really good considering the modern day normal mode only gives 150 if you beat it. The modern version is also often considered harder than Molten mode since hard enemies come out way sooner. There are several great videos to prove it if you want to see it for yourself. After the game though, I was able to afford Enforcer and finally attempt Fallen mode. Today, with towers like Engineer and Accelerator, game modes such as Polluted Wastelands 2 with a boss over 1 million HP are not even that hard, so normal Fallen mode is an absolute joke. It's pretty much easy to solo on every map in the game. In old TDS though, Fallen was actually a genuine challenge. We have a team of 4, and even though the earlier waves were pretty much the same as Golden mode, the difficulty really starts to show on round 35. The Templar has a permanent shield and also over 10,000 HP, making it incredibly difficult to kill unless you spam SWAT vans or have explosive towers like Rocketeer and Mortar. By the way, in this game, Pyro slows down enemies, including bosses like the Fallen King. This makes it extremely useful. Despite all my SWAT vans and all our beefed up defenses, we weren't able to beat Fallen mode, which just goes to show that this game is not messing around. Our final talking points about the gameplay are the Easter event. It doesn't make sense that it's around considering it's August, but might as well cover it. The event has 2 difficulties, the normal and hard mode. The normal mode replaces your loadout and is only 10 waves long. This is an incredibly good event, but I'm not really going to cover it. I want you to play it for yourself. As for me though, I was barely able to beat it because we only had 3 people. To get Swarmer, you have to play the hard mode, but I couldn't load, so no hard mode. Now before I continue, I must mention TDS Legacy is not 100% accurate compared to old TDS, but it is definitely close enough to use it as a point of comparison to the modern day version of the game. You have seen the modes, the towers, and the event. There are still several other mechanics such as emotes and platinum and golden skins, all adding grinding and replayability to the old version of TDS. Obviously, since towers are cheap and you can earn more coins, the grind would run out pretty quickly if not for these features. But again, you've seen it all, and maybe it still doesn't make any sense why so many feel like this old version of the game is better. I mean, modern TDS has all of these things too, right? Well, besides the visuals, there's quite a huge difference between the games. Right from the lobby, old TDS looks clean and has even more elevators. Yes, it's true that the modern TDS has a matchmaking system, but purely looking at the lobbies, The new one just looks like a cluttered mess, and several areas just open the same UI that the buttons on the bottom of your screen do. This is all of course my opinion, but I do like old TDS more in this regard. When it comes to gameplay though, we had more options, the wave structure was more balanced, the hardest mode was actually a challenge, the grind was less tedious, there were more ways to grind with things such as the platinum crate, the events were actually tower defense, like the one we're used to, it had difficulty options, and it was not just a copy and pasted whatever this is, or a reskin of Fallen mode. But this is not all that sets the old version apart from our modern game. The old version got a similar amount, if not more players back then. 3 years later, hundreds of thousands of dollars, a massive development team, and all we see from this is the occasional skins and tower rebalances. The player count of TDS is pretty much still the same. Were all of those visual changes and occasional copy and pasted events even worth it if they barely expanded the player base of Tower Defense Simulator? Don't get me wrong, there were great events like Violent Nights, but I really don't think most people give the smallest amount of a damn whether a game looks like this or like this. They just want to play the one that's more fun. The modern version of the game has invested really heavily into monetization. The constant plushies and game passes always being pumped out. Also, they invested clearly way too much into the visuals. Can you imagine if the developers kept the game as simple as it was back then, but still expanded the development team? If all the people they hired didn't get poured into monetizing and beautifying the game, but rather making it more fun to play. Instead of removing modes, they would instead add things that were promised long ago, like PvP or Chaos mode. How much quicker could updates get released if the developers were going for things reminiscent of the old Tower Defense Simulator, rather than having a quality standard similar to Violent Nights? A good example of a game that can consistently add new fun content is Bloons Tower Defense 6. They have added only 4 towers in the 5 years that their game has been out, but the game still increased in popularity a lot. They have added things such as community challenges, bosses, races, and lots more to keep people playing, even 5 years down the line. Not to mention, the game chose a level of quality that's detailed enough to be visually appealing, while not requiring 8 months for every big update. Back to Tower Defense Simulator and its old counterpart. Maybe it now starts to become clear why the old version is loved by so many. It was kept simple enough so that big and truly fun updates could be released more often, all while not being overly monetized, having more use for towers, having more ways to grind, and having better events to play. I would honestly completely not mind if Tower Defense Simulator simplified their game and graphics to free up a lot of their time they could invest in content updates. But I do recommend you play the game and comment your thoughts on old TDS. Yeah, this one was a doozy. Like, subscribe, goodbye.